Four college students went to sleep in a quiet house near campus. By morning, nothing about that house or the town around it would ever feel the same again. This is not a story told for shock. It's not about rumors, internet theories, or spectacle. It's about what is known, what was proven, and what remains, even after the case reached its legal end. Before we begin, an important note. This video discusses a real criminal case involving the loss of life. It is presented for informational and educational purposes only, using publicly available facts and official court records. All legal outcomes described are based on publicly reported court proceedings as of the time of this recording. No graphic details will be shown or described. No speculation will be presented as truth, and no one is characterized beyond what has been established by the legal process. This story is told with respect for the victims, their families, and everyone affected. True crime is often consumed quickly, reduced to headlines, timelines, and conclusions. But some cases demand something different. They ask us to slow down, to separate fact from noise, and to remember that behind every document and court ruling are real people, with lives that existed long before the moment everything changed. In November 2022, four University of Idaho students, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were killed in a crime that shattered a small college town and drew global attention. What followed was a long, careful investigation, a legal process that unfolded over years, and a conclusion reached not through spectacle, but through evidence and law. This series walks through that story, step by step, grounded only in what authorities confirmed, what courts established, and what is known today. But before any investigation, before any evidence, before any courtroom, we begin with who they were. They were four young people in the middle of ordinary, hopeful, unfinished lives. Kaylee Goncalves, 21. Kaylee was weeks away from graduation, standing right on the edge of a new chapter. She had already accepted a job out of state and was preparing to leave college life behind. Apartment plans, career steps, the quiet logistics of becoming fully independent. She had even recently bought a new car, something she was proud of and excited to show friends. The weekend she returned to Moscow wasn't meant to be momentous. It was a visit. Time with the people who had defined her college years. That's what makes it so human, so normal. Those who knew Kaylee described someone bright, expressive, and deeply loyal. She was the kind of friend who checked in, who defended the people she loved, who made energy feel lighter just by being in the room. Her presence wasn't quiet, it was warm and unmistakable. She wasn't just finishing college, she was stepping into the version of life she had worked towards for years. Madison Mogen, 21. Maddie, to family and friends, had a steadiness about her, a quiet kindness, the kind of person who didn't need to be loud to matter deeply. She and Kaylee had been close for years, their friendship stretching back long before college. Choosing the same university allowed them to keep building a bond that had already lasted through adolescence, shared milestones, shared memories, shared everyday life. They weren't just roommates, they were longtime friends who had grown up side by side. Madison worked at Mad Greek, balancing school and responsibility the way so many students do. Co-workers remembered her as reliable and gentle, someone who showed up and did her job without needing attention for it. She was studying marketing, still figuring out exactly what shape her future would take, a season of life defined not by certainty but by possibility. Xana Kernodle, 20. Xana had transferred to the University of Idaho, navigating new classes, new routines, and new friendships. The kind of transition that requires both courage and adaptability. She worked while attending school, managing responsibilities with the social life that makes college years memorable. Friends describe Xana as affectionate and full of energy, someone who felt things deeply and expressed care openly. She stayed close with her family, especially her father, who often spoke about how proud he was watching her grow into her own person. Her life wasn't a finished story, it was mid sentence, still forming, still discovering, still becoming. Ethan Chapin, 20. Ethan was a freshman, early in his college experience, still in that phase where everything feels new and wide open. He was one of three triplets, a bond his family described as incredibly close. Siblings who moved through life as a unit long before they ever left home. He was known for being easygoing and grounded, someone comfortable in his own skin. Friends say he had a calm presence, not the loudest in the room, but someone people naturally gravitated towards. He played sports growing up and carried that team oriented spirit into his friendship. That night, he was simply where he wanted to be, with someone he cared about. The house on Kings Road. The four students lived or were staying in a six-bedroom house on King Road, just off campus. Among friends, it was known as social home, a place where people gathered, laughed, studied, and lived the ordinary rhythm of college life. The walls held decorations, phones held photos, the space reflected lives actively being lived. It was never meant to be remembered for tragedy. Kaylee, Madison, Xana, Ethan, not just victims, not just names repeated in news cycles. They were young adults in motion, building careers, deepening friendships, calling home, making plans for trips, jobs, apartments, and futures they expected to have time to reach. Before investigation timelines, before court evidence, before legal outcomes, there were full lives being actively lived. And that's where the story deserves to begin. The air on King Road is cold that night. Not the sharp kind of cold that bites, the quiet kind that settles in and makes everything feel still. Street lights glow against clear Idaho skies. Most homes nearby are dark. It's just another late weekend night near the University of Idaho. The house at 1122 King Road looks like it always does. A three-story student rental tucked into the hillside. Paint a little worn, porch light on, windows warm with the kind of glow that says people are home. Inside, it feels lived in. Backpacks rest near chairs, shoes sit kicked off by the door. The quiet hum of a heater runs somewhere in the background, steady, ordinary. The lowest level holds two bedrooms and a bathroom. Doors closed, lights off, the kind of deep sleep that follows a late night. This part of the house is calm, separated from the activity above. Sound doesn't travel here easily. Investigators later determined from cell phone data that the phone associated with the eventual suspect went silent in the early morning hours, then later reconnected after the estimated time of the killings, helping to narrow the timeline of events that night. Up the stairs, the second floor opens into the main living space. The kitchen counters hold everyday clutter, cups, snacks, small reminders of busy college life. A sliding glass door leads out to a back deck overlooking the dark hillside. Two bedrooms branch off from this floor, one belonging to a roommate who turned in for the night. The other is Xana Kernodle's room, a space filled with the ordinary details of a student's life, Blankets, chargers, clothes draped over a chair. The house feels settled, quiet but not tense. The kind of quiet that comes after laughter fades and everyone finally goes to sleep. Another narrow staircase leads up. The third floor is smaller, more private. At the end of the hall is the bedroom where Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen are sleeping. Their rooms still hold the soft sign of a normal night. Beds close together, belongings scattered in familiar places, phones charging nearby. It's the comfort of shared space, the safety of being surrounded by friends. Beyond the walls, Moscow is quiet. A car passes now and then on the road below. Wind brushes lightly against the house. Nothing that would draw attention, nothing that feels out of space. Inside, doors are closed. Lights are off. Phones go still. The house, like the rest of the neighborhood, settles into the deep silence that comes just before morning. And at that moment, inside these rooms, on these floors, in these quiet beds, no one knows that this ordinary house is about to become the center of an investigation that will reach far beyond this street. Because right now, it is only a home, filled with people who believe they are safe. Investigators later concluded that all 4 students were killed sometime between about 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. that Sunday morning, a window based on evidence gathered in the investigation. The house does not change all at once. It never does. At first, it's just a half awareness that comes with sleep. Sounds slipping in and out of dreams, a distant thud, the faint echo of movement. Something that could be nothing and usually is. On the 3rd floor, the hallway outside Kaylee and Madison's room sits in near darkness. Any sound here carries just enough to be noticed, not enough to demand attention. Below on the 2nd floor, the kitchen is quiet. The refrigerator hums. The sliding glass door reflects the dark interior like a mirror. The deck outside is empty, the hillside swallowed by shadow. Somewhere in the house, a phone vibrates briefly. A notification, then goes still again. Later investigation documents indicated that investigators believed someone entered the house during those early morning hours, based on a combination of physical evidence, witness accounts, and other data. A roommate on the 2nd floor stirs, not fully awake, just alert enough to notice something sounds different. It could be footsteps above. It could be a noise from elsewhere in the house. Houses like this carry sounds strangely at night. She tells herself it's normal. Another pause. Then another sound, faint and out of place. Something that in hindsight became part of the timeline investigators would later piece together. On the 3rd floor, the shared bedroom remains closed off from the rest of the house. Inside, 2 friends sleep in the same room, the quiet comfort of not being alone. Down 1 level, Xana's room sits just off the kitchen. The door is closed, the hallway dim. Eventually, the 2nd floor roommate wakes mournfully. She later told investigators she saw what appeared to be someone moving down the hallway, movements she could later place in roughly the early morning hours based on phone data and other evidence. The house is quiet again. Heavy, quiet. The roommate stands still, caught between fear and denial. The part of the mind that insists there must be an explanation, that somehow this moment will resolve itself if she just waits. Eventually, she locks the door. Upstairs, the 3rd floor remains still. Downstairs, the 1st floor sleeps. unaware that anything has happened. Outside, the early morning air holds steady. No sirens, no alarms, only the slow realization, still hours away, that something was deeply wrong. Morning does not arrive suddenly. It seeps in. At first, it's just a thinning of darkness, the kind that presses softly against closed eyelids. Pale light gathered behind curtains. Somewhere outside, a car passes on the road below King Road, tires whispering against asphalt. Inside the house, nothing stirs. On the first floor, two roommates remain asleep in their separate bedroom. Their doors are closed. The house has always been quiet in the morning after weekends, late nights, heavy sleep, alarms ignored. On the second floor, Xana's door stays shut. Cups sit where they were left. The sliding glass door remains closed. No one has come down for water. No one has answered texts. Time passes. Late morning begins to take shape. The kind where phones are usually checked, messages read, plans made. But in this house, messages go unanswered. Calls go undelivered. Lights remain off. It doesn't feel alarming at first. College homes often wake slowly. Someone might be sleeping in. Someone might have left early. Eventually, unease replaces assumption. One of the surviving roommates wakes and notices the stillness. She sends a message, no response. She knocks on a door. It doesn't open. She knocks again. Nothing. At some point, friends are contacted, people who know the house well, who recognize when something feels off. They arrive and try the doors themselves. They call out, they wait, still nothing. What happens next is not dramatic. There is no screaming, no immediate understanding of what has occurred. There is only growing confusion. At 11:58 a.m., a call is placed to emergency services, not describing violence but reporting an unresponsive person. The language of the call matters. At that moment, no one is describing a crime. They are asking for help. First responders arrive at the house on King Road. They enter, and within moments, it becomes clear that this is not just a medical emergency. The atmosphere changes instantly. Police secure the scene. More officers are called. What hours earlier felt like uncertainty now fills with controlled urgency. Radios crackling, voices measured, movements purposeful. By early afternoon, the reality becomes public. 4 students are dead. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin. 2 of the victims, Kaylee and Madison, are found together on the 3rd floor, in the bedroom they shared. Xana and Ethan are found on the 2nd floor, in or near Xana's room. The 1st floor roommates are physically unharmed. The layout of the house, once ordinary, now carries devastating significance. Investigators begin to see what no one else could have known that morning: how movement through the house was possible without waking everyone inside. Words spread quickly. Within hours, the University of Idaho issues alerts and cancels classes. Students lock doors. Parents across the country reach for their phones, calling children who suddenly sound very far away. Moscow, Idaho. A town used to quiet weekends and familiar faces shifts overnight. Police initially state that there is no immediate threat to the public, but fear doesn't wait for clarification. Rumors fill the absence of answers. People replay the same question over and over and over again. How could something like this happen here? Inside the house, investigators begin the slow, painstaking work of documentation. Photographs are taken of every room. Doorways are measured. Staircases are mapped. Nothing is moved without record. What was once a home becomes a preserved moment in time. Every object now potential evidence. Every shadow something to understand. Outside, the press gathers. Inside, the silence returns, heavier now, weighted with meaning. The night is over, but the story is only beginning. As investigators documented the scene, another set of official records would later help clarify what had occurred inside the house: the medical examiner's autopsy findings. These summaries became part of public court record during the legal process. According to those official findings, all four victims died from multiple sharp force injuries sustained during the early morning hours of November 13, 2022. The reports confirmed that the attacks were fatal and occurred within the time frame investigators had already established through other evidence. Court documents also showed that the number of injuries varied among the victims. Some showed signs consistent with being attacked while asleep, while at least one victim had injuries indicating an attempt to defend themselves. These medical findings helped investigators understand how events unfolded inside the house, but they were presented in court strictly as forensic evidence, not for speculation or interpretation beyond what could be supported by facts. No additional conclusions about motive or sequence are drawn from these reports here. They remain part of the official record considered during the legal proceedings involving the suspect. Recent unsealed court filings from legal proceedings against the suspect include key summaries of medical examiner findings that were submitted as part of expert disclosures. The filings did not include complete autopsy reports, but did describe the number of reported sharp force injuries documented for each victim. According to these official summaries, the four students together sustained a combined total of at least approximately 150 recorded stab wounds that night. The filing estimate about 38 wounds for Kaylee, 28 for Madison, 17 for Ethan, and 67 for Xana. Public summaries of those filings also indicate that 3 of the victims were likely attacked while asleep and unable to move, whereas the pattern of injuries and forensic context for Xana suggests she was awake and showed defensive actions during part of the attack. These details were referenced by both prosecution and defense in court filings as part of expert disclosures, and presented here strictly as documented findings from official records, not speculation. When first responders and investigators entered the house on King Road, the quiet, ordinary space that once held laughter and late-night study sessions became a crime scene. Detectives from Moscow Police Department began a methodical, painstaking process of documentation, measuring doorways, photographing rooms, mapping staircases, and cataloging every object to create a visual and spatial record of the house at the moment it was discovered. This wasn't a rushed search. It was careful work designed to preserve context and detail for later analysis. By the time charges were brought, the state's case rested on a combination of forensic findings and analytical correlation, not on speculation or dramatic confrontation scenes. Each piece, however small on its own, became part of the larger narrative that investigators presented in court and in public filings. After investigators had catalogued every room, surface, and object in the King Road house, the puzzles of that night began to take shape, not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through patient connection of many small pieces of evidence. One of the earliest clues investigators keyed in on was a tan leather knife sheath found on a bed at the scene. Forensic technicians photographed it, documented it, and sent it to the lab. Laboratory analysis later showed trace DNA on the sheet that did not match any victim, a critical biological clue that would guide the investigation forward. Because the DNA did not match anything in the National Law Enforcement Database, the investigators used investigative genetic genealogy, a technique that compares DNA to public ancestry databases and builds family trees from partial matches. Through this process, law enforcement narrowed potential leads toward a specific name. At the same time, digital evidence was contributing its own threat. Cell phone data showed that the phone associated with the emerging suspect connected repeatedly to cell towers near the victim's residence, before and after the estimated time of the killings, including multiple late-night and early morning pings months earlier, giving investigators both context and a pattern to compare with physical evidence. Investigators also reviewed neighborhood surveillance footage. Cameras in the area showed a white sedan, later identified as a white Hyundai Elantra, passing near the King Road house multiple times in the early morning hours around the time of the killings. That vehicle later became an important part of the investigators' timeline and linkage to the developing suspect. Alongside physical and digital evidence, first-hand accounts factored into building the timeline. One roommate later told investigators she heard sounds in the early morning and saw a figure leaving through the hallway towards the sliding glass door, a memory that helped corroborate elements of the sequence of events when compared with physical and electronic evidence. Individually, none of these pieces constitute proof on their own, but together they formed a pattern of consistent clues, a tapestry woven from biological traces, signal patterns, and observed movements that investigators could follow in narrowing their focus. In a case like this, breakthroughs don't happen in isolation. They happen in the intersections where different kinds of evidence align, overlap, and reinforce each other. And that convergence, the blending of DNA, digital records, and neighborhood footage set the stage for the next phase of the investigation. For weeks after the killing on November 13, 2022, investigators worked without a named suspect. They pieced together evidence from many different directions: physical, digital, and documentary, looking for patterns that would help answer a question that had gripped a quiet college town and much of the nation. Who could have done this? Then, after weeks of analysis, law enforcement agencies, including local police, state investigators, and federal partners, took a decisive step. On December 30, 2022, in Pennsylvania, a suspect was arrested in connection with the quadruple murder of the University of Idaho students. That person, Bryan Christopher Kohberger, was taken into custody without incident at the home where he had been staying with family during the holiday season. Kohberger's arrest marked a dramatic narrowing of the investigation, not because answers were complete, but because enough corroborated evidence existed to support a legal charging decision and extradition back to Idaho. News of the arrest was met with a mix of relief, shock, and continued worry in Moscow and beyond, as communities that had lived with fear for weeks suddenly faced a new chapter, one of questions, legal proceedings, and long-awaited answers. In the weeks that followed, prosecutors would outline the evidence that connected Kohberger to the crime scene, including genetic clues, phone data, and surveillance correlations. Defense counsel would challenge parts of that evidence in court, and months of legal motions and hearing would follow. But the moment of his arrest was the point at which the investigation shifted, from unknown perpetrator to known defendant, a transition that both the police and the families had been waiting for since that early morning in November. What happens in a courtroom before a trial begins is not dramatic in the cinematic sense. There are no loud declarations, no sudden revelations. Yet this phase is where the story is shaped for jurors and the public alike. After his arrest in December 2022 and extradition in Idaho, Bryan was formally charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary related to the death of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan. A not guilty plea was entered on his behalf in May 2023, after which pre-trial proceedings began. In the months that followed, Judge Stephen Hippler presided over a series of hearings in Boise, Idaho, where both defense and prosecution filed motions arguing over what evidence would be permitted at trial, decisions that would deeply shape how the case could be presented before a jury. One major point of debate was genetic evidence. Prosecutors planned to rely on DNA recovered from a knife shield found at the scene to connect Kohberger to the crime. The defense challenged this, arguing issues with how investigative genetic genealogy was used to identify Kohberger as a possible suspect. The judge ruled that the DNA evidence could be admitted, finding that Kohberger had no reasonable expectation of privacy in DNA left at the scene. Prosecutors also indicated they intended to present other pieces of evidence during the trial, including digital records such as cell phone location data, surveillance footage of a vehicle near the house that matched one later linked to Kohberger, and other data related to movement and timing around the estimated window of the killing. The defense raised objections to some of these materials on various grounds. Another contested area involved online activity. Prosecutors wanted to introduce evidence of an Amazon purchase record showing a knife and sheath similar to the type found at the scene. Defense attorney argued that such account history could be accessed by others and therefore should not automatically be used to tie Kohberger to the crime. Even phone records and witness descriptions became point of legal argument. Prosecutors sought to have portions of a 911 call and phone text activity included as evidence. The defense pushed back, citing concerns about admissibility and context. Some aspects were allowed, while others were restricted, as the judge viewed motions on what jurors should and should not hear. Throughout these proceedings, both sides also sparred over procedural matters, such as limitations on public comment, defense requests related to discovery deadlines, and how certain testimony should be framed if presented at trial. These hearings, long and detailed, were not about guilt or innocence in a broad sense, but about how the story would be told when the trial eventually began. That trial was initially scheduled for August 2025, with prosecutors indicating they would seek the death penalty if convicted. Every ruling from the judge about evidence, witness testimony, or admissibility was a step towards outlining what jurors could eventually see, hear, and weigh. Only after these extensive pre-trial motions and hearings did the case take a different turn, one that would change how the courtroom proceedings ultimately concluded. After months of pre-trial hearing and legal motions, the case took a major turn in June 2025, when prosecutors and defense attorneys reached an agreement that would avoid a full jury trial. Instead of moving forward with a trial scheduled for later in the year, Bryan Christopher Kohberger, the man arrested in December 2022, agreed to a plea deal with prosecutors. Under the terms of the agreement, he would plead guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary in connection with the death of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. On July 2, 2025, in a courtroom in Boise, Idaho, Kohberger formally entered his guilty plea. When the judge asked if he was pleading guilty because he was guilty, he answered yes for each of the murder charges. This plea came in exchange for prosecutors agreeing to remove the death penalty as a possible sentence, which had been under consideration given the severity of the charges. The change from a planned trial to a guilty plea was significant. It meant the case would not be decided by a jury, but instead would move directly to sentencing based on the admitted charges and the plea agreement. Family members and the public were aware that this decision meant a legally binding admission of responsibility, though not all families were unanimous in their views on the plea deal. 3 weeks after the plea, on July 23, 2025, a judge in Boise presided over the formal sentencing hearing. Judge Stephen Hippler handed down the sentence: 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole for the murder counts, along with an additional 10 years for the burglary charge. As part of the agreement, Kohberger also faced financial penalties and restitution ordered by the court. At the hearing, families and surviving roommates were given the opportunity to speak. Many delivered powerful and emotional impact statements, describing the ongoing pain, loss, and how the crime had changed their lives. Some expressed relief that the case had reached a legal conclusion, while others voiced frustration that questions about motive would likely remain unanswered. Kohberger declined to make a statement in court during the sentencing, choosing instead to remain silent. The judge acknowledged this, noting that no explanation could justify what had occurred, and reaffirming that the life sentence without parole would ensure he remains incarcerated for the rest of his life. This marked a major legal milestone in the case, the formal end of the criminal process through a guilty plea and sentencing, even as the question of why continued to linger for many affected by the tragedy. The courtroom doors closed behind the judge, but the impact of what happened on November 13, 2022 did not end there. Even as the criminal case reached a conclusion with guilty pleas and life sentences, the aftermath of that early morning in Moscow, Idaho, continued to shape community memory, healing efforts, and conversations about safety and accountability. In early 2023, the University of Idaho accepted a donation of the off-campus house in King Road where the 4 students were found, with plans to demolish it to help the community heal and avoid sensationalizing the space. By the end of December 2023, the house had been demolished, removing a physical reminder of the tragedy while families and classmates continue to remember Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan. As part of the community response, the university built the Vandal Healing Garden and Memorial on campus, a place of reflection, remembrance, and peaceful gathering for those mourning lost students. The space was designed with inputs from students, faculty, and alumni, and serves as a living tribute to the victims and others who have died while part of the Vandal family. Scholarships were established in memory of Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, and Madison Mogen, with plans underway to establish one in Kaylee Goncalves' name as well. These funds are meant to support future students and keep the victims' legacies alive through education. The University of Idaho also awarded posthumous degrees to all 4 students during its May 2023 commencement ceremony, affirming their academic achievements and futures that were cut short. In early 2026, the families of the 4 victims filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Washington State University, WSU, where Bryan Christopher Kohberger was a doctoral student and teaching assistant at the time of the murders. The complaint, filed in Superior Court in Washington, alleges that the university failed to take action in response to repeated reports of concerning and predatory behaviors that Kohberger exhibited before the killings, and that these failures contributed to an environment in which the tragedy could occur. This civil case is separate from the criminal proceedings and seeks accountability and transparency in how institutions respond to warning signs to protect their community. These legal actions reflect not just grief, but an ongoing search for understanding and a broader discussion about campus safety and institutional responsibility. The repercussions of that night ripple beyond legal outcomes or headlines. Families honor their loved ones through personal stories, photographs, and community engagement. Classmates and friends describe how routines, sense of safety, and community life shifted in its wake. Students returning to campus carry reminders not just in memorial spaces, but in everyday routines. Quieter conversations, attentive awareness of one another, and a collective effort to support mental health and community safety. What endures of this event, from the healed space of the garden to scholarships and civil legal actions, is a tapestry of human response. Not just grief, but community resilience. Not just tragedy, but memory and meaning. Not just criminal case, but lasting consequences. The story of the University of Idaho murders is not over, not in hearts, not in minds, and not in the ongoing quest to understand how communities can better protect each other. But what endures is this: 4 young lives, remembered not just for how they died, but for who they were and how deeply they were loved. When the courtroom empties and the microphones are turned off, what remains are the echoes of names and memories. 4 young lives, full of promise, laughter, connection, and future plans, changed countless others in their absence. Their story did not end with a sentence. It continued in gardens planted in their honor, in scholarships given in their names, in spaces created for quiet remembrance, and in the lives of the families and friends who carried them forward. Justice, in this case, came in the form of accountability, a plea acknowledging responsibility and life sentences that ensures one man will never walk free again. But justice does not restore what was lost. It does not knit back time. It does not answer every question. It does insist that the truth be recorded, examined, and made to stand up to scrutiny. And for those who chose to follow the story, not for sensation, not for fear, but for understanding, the responsibility is to remember what matters most. Behind every document is a person. Behind every headline is a family. And behind every fact is a life once lived. Thank you for listening with intention. Thank you for resisting the pull of quick answers. Thank you for recognizing that real stories, especially painful ones, deserve patience, care, and respect. When the cameras fade and the spectacle dims, what endures are the people, not the crime. See you in the next one. Bye bye.